Welcome to the Future Generations Podcast, providing you with the world-changing content necessary to inspire you, your family, and our planet to a life of optimal health potential. We'll help you make the choices that powerfully influence the lives you bring into this world. It's time to strengthen our resolve to do better now and for our future generations with your host, Dr. Stanton Hom.
Okay, welcome to another episode of the Future Generations Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Stanton Hom, and I have with me possibly one of the most special guests that I've ever had. And I have looked forward to this interview. Vera didn't know that, but I've been looking forward to this interview for a long time, and I have a lot of reasons for that. And I'm sure we're going to get into all of them. But Vera is a Holocaust survivor, and it's not something she used to share before the last 3 years. And at this stage, I feel like your message, and especially when you do share about the documentary that you have been, that is out now, I believe your message to be one of the most important messages that I feel is almost on the brink of being lost with modern humanity. But I have with me Vera Sharav. Vera, I would love for you to introduce yourself so that our audience gets to know you both personally and professionally.
Well, I've been a human rights advocate for several decades now. I head an organization, the Alliance for Human Research Protection, which I formed because of the unethical medical experiments that have been ongoing essentially for many decades. And as a survivor, I was particularly horrified that some of them really do approximate the kind of experiments that were done by Nazi doctors.
Wow.
So, so the focus is on medical malfeasance and in particular human rights violations, without which you will and may be headed toward another Holocaust, and this time it's global.
I was just looking at a few headlines, because there have been for 3 years now, a very direct exposure of the tyranny that has, potentially just been waiting to reveal its head, right? And there are people who don't like the analogy, between what's happening today and the Holocaust. And I appreciate you starting with such a very forward comment and a forward perspective. One, because you lived through it, but two, I would just like to touch that right away, because people don't think it's the same, but many of us we just know that it is.
Okay. I'd like to first tell you that survivors who survived worse than I did, actually, because I was not in a slave labor camp or in a death camp. I was in one of these transit camps, although it was a transit camp for several years. But survivors immediately, some of whom, for example, a chemist, Primo Levi, who was an Italian chemist, and he wrote extensively also about his experience of the Holocaust. And he immediately said, it happened, therefore it can happen again. It can happen everywhere.
Right.
This kind of refrain has been repeated often. But now, the gatekeepers of the Holocaust have taken upon themselves to dictate what may and may not be talked about mentioning the Holocaust. So they do not, and they now have come out totally plainly that one is not allowed to make comparisons on any aspect, either historical or current, and the Holocaust. What they have done essentially is a crime against the victims, because they have made the Holocaust irrelevant to history. And let me emphasize that there is nothing in history that is more relevant to what is going on now on many levels, the medical in particular, the censorship in particular, the setting aside of all legal and constitutional rights, and most importantly, the universal human right to voluntary informed consent, which was the only positive outcome of the Holocaust. And that was during the Nazi doctor's trial, became part of the verdict, the Nuremberg Code of 1947. This is a legal and moral document, the most important in all of medical history. And it is being violated as it has never been since it was embraced. It is also, by the way, part of US law.
I've been thinking about that. I'm a veteran, and I went to Iraq in 2003, 2004. And I was just telling this story in an interview this morning with a very prominent chiropractic school, and they had no idea what my story was, right? And people have asked me why we started the podcast, why we had events, freedom-oriented events here in San Diego, and why I'm just a chiropractor. I'm just a dad, and I'm just a doc. That's it. I keep my life very plain and simple. But when I was in Iraq, we pushed through the country. There's no more regime. And we found a people that were so enslaved mentally, right? They weren't physically enslaved anymore. They were mentally enslaved, that we would have at our checkpoints blocks, miles of people and vehicles, and they would not leave their own city because they used to have to get permission to go from one city to the next city, right? And I started to communicate very early on that telling us not to leave our homes and telling us to lock down, that we couldn't open our businesses, that we couldn't be within 6 feet of each other. It triggered in me this response where, as a modern soldier, right? Like that's 6, that's a lot longer than that. That's 20 years ago. 20 years ago, I'm a modern soldier, that but I'm an extension of those that came from my grandfather, World War II veteran, that we don't even recognize to this day and age, that when you take an oath and you pledge allegiance and you stand for freedom, that we're not just going out to countries like, say, Iraq, right? Which, yes, we needed to free that country. And yes, these people were, I don't want to get into the ins and outs of that actual war, but we saw very firsthand that we would rip out pages of our own notebooks, scribble nothing on them, hand them to someone, and they'd be like, thank you. And then they could leave, because mentally they were so enslaved to ask for permission to go from one place to another. Whereas for you, being that you lived through what you lived through, the only good thing to come out of that time and the Holocaust being the exact thing that they attacked and continued to attack, and then continued to grow upon, that attack just 3 years ago. I appreciate you sharing that right away, because a lot of people have left some of my events because there was an analogy between, Hitler and Gavin Newsom, and there was, and they felt so uncomfortable because it couldn't possibly be as bad as that, when in reality it's not, it's just a different coding, right? It's a different marketing campaign almost.
Yeah, well, part of it is, as I say, the gatekeeping, and the other is the lack of history, lack of teaching of history. People now do not study history. In fact, they don't study the humanities. The only thing that's important now is science and technology. And that has really, really reduced the whole perspective that people have of the world, of themselves, of their rights. They don't really appreciate that those Bill of Rights were codified for a reason.
Mm-hmm.
And those who formulated both the Bill of Rights and the Constitution, I mean, they argued quite heatedly about how really to formulate these basic fundamental rights and the legal structure for society, for the American people. And now they take it as if it's just there as something that doesn't really affect them. When in fact, and that cavalier way of sort of thinking, well, that's not really important to me in my life. Yeah, the politicians have to know that. It's sort of nice to recite it sometimes, that's what they've made it irrelevant too. And you see, when you reduce the importance of these kind of norms upon which your whole society is built, well, then you are participating in your own enslavement, because there are those, and let's be real about this. This has been covered up for many years, and those who don't read history don't know it at all. But the fact is that the Nazi regime was not really only German Nazi. They were being supported, aided, and abetted by multinational corporations, many US corporations, also British and Swiss and Swedish. Everybody kind of pretended at the end of the war that they had nothing to do with it, and it was just, and of course now we ended and the Nazis are gone and everything is hunky-dory. No, it's not. The Nazis and the Nazi culture, the attitude toward people, is very much in evidence right now. The Nazis referred to all disabled people as worthless eaters. The very first medical murder victims, and yes, medicine can become murderous. And that was first under the Nazis, and it is now. Now it's global. The first medical murder victims were German. They were not Jews. They were German infants and young children under the age of 3. They were disabled in some way. And they were taken away from their families. The families were deceived. They were told that they would receive special treatment to improve their health. And they were medically murdered, and then medical doctors signed fake death certificates that indicated that the children died of natural causes. After the little children of all ages who were disabled, and then the mentally ill, and then the nursing home residents. And the first thing that happened in 2020, March and April, in all Western European countries, Australia, 5 states in the United States, Canada, was a medical murder operation against the elderly. They were condemned to death. The heads of state ordered hospitals not to treat the elderly. They were given high doses of drugs that killed. They were sent to nursing homes where if they had been infected with whatever, they would infect everyone else, because nursing homes are not equipped medical gear. And it was premeditated murder. They all kind of did it at the same time. They all issued these orders in exactly the same way. In Italy, they were among the first where they died. Now, in my own state in New York, then Governor Andrew Cuomo, before he gave total immunity from liability to hospitals and nursing homes, he predicted that this virus in nursing homes will be like fire through dry grass. So I guess he knew what he was doing. He is responsible for the mass murder of more than 15,000 New Yorkers. Well, the Nazis called those disabled worthless eaters, unfit for life. So they took them out. Well, what's the excuse here? It was partly, both in Nazi Germany and here, partly it was to get rid of an economic burden. They were no longer useful. Now, this goes to the crux of what eugenics is about. Eugenics separates people according to a value system. And who decides who's valuable and who's not? When you have that kind of mentality, you really are showing a complete disregard for the rights of human beings. Human beings don't need government agents to tell them whether they're allowed to live or die. That's not how democracy is supposed to work. So we are very, very far rolling back on that so-called slippery slope. We've slipped. We're practically at the very bottom.
Vera, I a part of me is speechless, but a part of me is fully recognizing that that's like maybe firsthand what my gut and my intuition was screaming at me about over the last 3 years. And then, I think one of the questions, like, thank you for the perspective on the fact that there weren't just German Nazis and that it was multinational corporations. And then also just relating it to the fact that
their current corporations, they exist now.
It's
seamless. It's seamless.
It's crazy to yes, because on one end I'm thinking about Pfizer, being I think founded in 1860s time frame, and then it reminds me of Bayer. When Bayer bought Monsanto, I started to do some research and realized that they were part of the entire Holocaust and testing, right? And so it's I guess a part of me, and then realizing that when it comes down to it, it is almost always about labor and commerce and this multinational corporation
financial interest
cartel. That I guess the question I have, the thing that surprised me the most, and maybe you would be able to express this, because it is clear as day that Cuomo, Newsom were a type of state governor, and then there are others, that whether it's Florida, whether it's South Dakota, that recognized the sides of history that this day was presenting, but what I was surprised about, and I don't know if you know more about this, was all the way down to like our county supervisors in California, that there are people that were tied to Soros, or people that are tied to the World Economic Forum. And it was shocking to me, because and maybe that's my own pie in the sky, being from California. Everything is just super, like they blind you with the beach, and they teach you all the Hollywood, and all the things to distract you from. But I was surprised, that the majority of our own supervisors that locked us down, that continued to wage more and more and more tyranny on our populace, especially at the elderly and especially at the children,
Mhm,
that the webs of evil
mhm.
could get to that level of society. And is that something that you have a perspective on?
Well, one of the things that happened then, and that we saw that clearly, that it took effect here too, like the police brutality against demonstrators who were perfectly peaceful,
Yes.
but all hell, it is amazing how quickly people who before this would have been decent people,
Mm-hmm.
how they can turn when they're given a shield. First of all, they're all given a shield of, this is what you should do, this is fine,
Yeah,
this is what the
I,
rule is.
I don't want people to miss that. What Vera said earlier about Cuomo giving hospitals and nursing homes immunity, like when they had immunity from liability. We've been saying for the entire 3 years that the whole point of this entire thing has been the shots, has been the passports, has been the surveillance, has been all those things, the social credit system that will be coming. But with regard to the shots, all they wanted to do in the States was to get it on the 1986 like childhood schedule so that it would be protected, liability free forever. And so I don't want people to miss that, because you think that it's just people's character. You think it's just their own decision making, that they're choosing to enforce a law or not enforce a law. But
No.
in reality, it has everything to do with this liability free environment that we're in.
Well, yeah, but it's this shot is beyond the children's,
Yes.
because it is not in fact a medical product.
Right.
This is countermeasure,
Mm-hmm.
and countermeasure is out of the jurisdiction of the FDA or the CDC.
Interesting.
The people who are in all these various positions, from the lowliest in whatever agency to the highest, I mean, they all are following a script that has been given from central, whatever central is. And so that they are not given a chance to choose whether to enforce or not, or discuss whether this makes sense or not. Nothing. Which is why this is what a dictatorship is like. You know, and many of them are pretty cynical too. We saw this during the lockdowns when Newsom and just about everyone, Pelosi, everyone was shown to go without masks and to be in
Mm-hmm.
what party, and,
Mm-hmm.
whether Newsom's birthday party up there in what was called
The wine country, essentially.
yeah,
Yep.
but in the particular restaurant was one of the most
French
expensive.
Laundry, right?
Yeah,
French
the
Laundry.
laundry. I mean, so it just happens that somebody at another table realized, hey, Newsom shouldn't be here because he's telling all Californians to obey. So clearly they knew that this had nothing to do with a virus and an infection. They knew that. Otherwise, they wouldn't have risked their lives. So this shows that there is what we're told is reality and real reality. And real reality they conceal because they've got a very, very nefarious agenda.
Yeah.
They want to enslave us.
Tell me a little bit about your documentary.
Well, there are several reasons that because I'd never done a documentary before. One of the reasons is because we may be the last generation of survivors who actually remember the history. So I felt it should be documented as quickly and as possible.
Now
And the other, so it
go ahead. Sorry.
yeah, it's called Never Again Is Now Global, and it's a 5-part documentary in which Holocaust survivors, their children, their grandchildren of different families from different parts of the world, what their experience was then and how they view what has been going on now. There are, of course, doctors and scientists, but they're not the stars. The stars are the people. And there are also German people who relate what their families experienced. Okay. And we even have the grandson of Nazi scientists who were brought to the United States under Operation Paperclip. They were smuggled into the United States, more than 1,600 of them.
Wow.
So it gives a great deal of information that people don't know. We do name the corporations and people. And it'll open people's eyes.
And these are current corporations too?
Absolutely.
Do you mind sharing?
Well, if IBM is one of the major ones.
Wow.
They actually facilitated the Holocaust by using their then punch card technology, the precursor of the computer. That's how they were able to locate every Jew in Germany and Austria and then in all the occupied countries. And not only to identify, locate, get their address, get all their relatives, their education, their place of work, their assets, everything was in those cards. And by the way, in those camps, Auschwitz and a few others, but not many, of those tattoos that were, branding Jews like cattle, those are IBM identification numbers. Now keep that really, really in mind. IBM is one of the major digital ID companies, okay? And in fact, that's who Cuomo had contracted in New York, and they, with their Excelsior passport, that was the green passport in New York during the time that it was required. So it gives me chills.
Yeah, me too.
In addition, you've got Ford Motor, you've got, of course, the Rockefeller Foundation, SO. You've got the tractors were given to them. Everything it was manufactured here, and of course the financial houses, and it includes quite an array of currently very prominent. You've got the Bushes, you've got you've got the Harrimans. Harrimans built the railroad tracks to Auschwitz.
Wow.
Okay? And the United States didn't bomb the tracks to these death camps. Why? So there is a great deal and of continuing. That Operation Paperclip, what it did is, first of all, it more than exonerated these Nazi doctors, scientists, engineers. It, brought them into the United States illegally against the orders of Harry Truman, president, and it scattered them across the United States into medical institutions, scientific laboratories, institutions, military bases like Fort Detrick. And they continued their Nazi experiments. And they inculcated Nazi methodology of inhumane medical atrocities into a whole generation of Americans. A direct link between those paperclip doctors was the CIA mind control experiments, MK Ultra, the kind of experiments that totally destroy human beings psychologically. The Nazis, in fact, at Dachau was one of the places where they conducted these experiments. They conducted a lot of psychological experiments as well as physical. And that's what interested, the CIA and the intelligence community. So it's a combination. And what we have now, what is being marketed as a vaccine and isn't a vaccine at all. Bioweapon, the biological weapon. That's what they've been working on, biological weapons, weapons. That's what gain of function is. This is biological weapon experiments that are illegal according to American law and international law.
It makes me, I mean, it's so unsettling. I would say that I've known some of what you've just shared, but not to the degree and not to the firsthand experience that you have. But it's unsettling because it at this point it makes it difficult. And this, I would admit that this is something that I experience, that it's hard to determine who to trust.
Okay. Yeah.
At this point, right? Because you
Yeah.
know, and at what level, what degree, of separation does somebody have to have from that lineage, right? That lineage of tyranny to awake, to make a new decision, to start a new path, to not follow on with whatever it is. And maybe they don't even know, maybe they're controlled opposition and they don't even know what they have been bred and born to do. It's crazy to think at this point. Could you speak to that at all?
Well, I think that the fact that people have been conditioned to feel that they have to obey authority without really thinking through, evaluating whether what is being told, what they're being really ordered to do, but even if it's done nicely, or what we think we should do, blah, 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 and then it just starts to happen before you think about it. That's the problem. People are not really thinking critically. They're not trusting their own judgment. And truly, your own judgment is all that you should, above all, trust. Because you don't trust yourself, why should anybody else trust what if you say?
And to the degree that you could trust anybody else is based on self-trust, right? Like there's no...
Yeah, I mean, you're giving up your God-given right to make choices for yourself and for your family, for your child. This is it's such a dereliction of responsibility that I really have a hard time with that. I can't, when I was in Germany, and this is in August 22, it was the first time that I had to really deliberate about going to Germany. But the German people who are awake and who do recognize how this all relates, and I was very kind of surprised, but they really sought from me they wanted forgiveness, for their people. And I told them, I said, look, I could never forgive the perpetrators. I don't believe in turning the other cheek. But you, second, third generation, I can't blame you. So, but that kind of, feeling, that's something I didn't expect. On the other hand, mainstream German and German law, very different. German law, so for example, German law, there's a law you're not allowed to touch, to say Holocaust with anything else. Okay, so that's the first thing. You're not allowed to. It's a criminal offense. And in fact, a group filed a criminal complaint against me for the speech that I gave at the 75th anniversary of the Nuremberg Code, for trivializing. Now, I am bringing the ashes back out and saying, this is relevant, this is where you're going, only it's going to be worse because there will be no escape. The current surveillance technology allows no escape. It's 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
Wow.
So you see the hypocrisy stems from, it's kind of, they initially enacted that law to prevent Holocaust denial. There's a whole batch of those, there's less of them now, I think, but still, it's essentially rabid anti-Semites who think the Jews are just making it all up, and never mind that none of those who stood on trial in Nuremberg ever said it didn't happen.
Wow.
That could have been their best defense, right? Not one. So, but they've perverted that ostensible objective and now use it to censor all discussion. And as a matter of fact, one of the German women, that she's also in the film, but when I got to meet her, I had written a letter on her behalf half a year earlier, or a few months earlier anyway. She was a docent at the Dachau Memorial. So she had studied the history and, took people and explained. Well, she participated in demonstrations and spoke against vaccine mandates. They fired her. Okay? They fired her. And she says in the film that when they forced people to show their passports, their vaccine passports, if they wanted to enter the memorial, she cried. She was fired. The perversion of truth versus dictated reality. The two don't go together.
I felt the same way when we visited some family in Memphis, Tennessee, and we went to the Civil Rights Museum. And it's at the Lorraine Motel where Martin Luther King was assassinated. And you just hear people just parroting over the loudspeakers, like, put your mask on, social distance, and all the things. And you try to start a conversation with the people there. And it doesn't even register the contradiction of civil rights, of human freedom, of civil liberties, personal autonomy and bodily autonomy.
Right.
And they're just like, they want to keep like swiping on their phone and do their job and just get on with the day.
I know.
And there's no connection at all to why this whole museum exists.
Yes, exactly.
It's crazy.
Exactly. Well, this is just it. There's no respect, because people really they don't think on their own. They just don't.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, have you ever thought, what is it that has turned people that wherever you go, whatever restaurant and bar, of course, but got to have loud music in there so that you really can't think, you can't really talk, right? What? People have become addicted. They can't without it.
Vera, tell me a little bit about this. If there is, I mean, I'll be honest with you. I feel very grateful to have this conversation because like I shared earlier, my grandfather's a World War II veteran. And I would be lying if I said that I was this incredibly interested grandson when I was a teenager before he passed, and that I just soaked up all the conversations of all the reasons why. To the day he died, he would pass me as much patriotic information as possible. He and I are the only two in our family tree that have served in the United States military, and proudly to that end, that I'm very grateful to have this perspective, because it gives me a window into potentially what he was trying to communicate to me when I was so young. But if there's something that I could describe as being able to witness, not just in this interview, but previous interviews that I've seen with you, this deep sense of purpose and mission that you on. Could you verbalize a little bit of that for me?
Well, yeah. Many survivors, not all, because no group is uniform. This is what they'd like us to be and what they're trying to funnel us into, but that's not the human species. But many of us have come to realize that our survival was for a purpose. And no, it's not, we weren't chosen, none of that. The purpose is to remember and to warn that it can happen again, and especially now that we see it happening. That's a mission. So I am, I'm going as fast as I can to as many interviews as I can to get the ear of as many people as I can to warn them. This is real. This is heading toward an abyss, the catastrophe from which there's no return if people go into those smart cities. Smart cities are digital surveillance concentration camps. That's what they are. That's what they're meant to be.
I appreciate you sharing that. It reminds me of, I'd be remiss if I didn't say that one of my favorite books of all time is Man's Search for Meaning. Viktor Frankl's book. I promised myself that I would listen to it again before I did this interview. I remember reading it for the first time when I was in Geneva. Actually, I was actually at the World Health Organization and the World Health Assembly at a time where I got to see, which was 2011. And Bill Gates was the keynote speaker, and he talked about 2011 to 2020 being the decade of the vaccine, where they were going to eradicate all infectious illness from the planet. It was just in the wake of H1N1, and then everybody just bowed their heads in obedience to this non-doctor. And I sat there as a young chiropractor, and I was just like, this is absolutely insane. Meanwhile, I get on the train to Bern. And I'm reading this book, like tears running out of my eyes, because I'm in the actual region of the world, which I'd never been before, where all of this is going down. And I believe that's what I believe that's what you are living out today. This deep sense of purpose and meaning that fueled Viktor Frankl's survival, that fueled his ability to actually help some of the Nazi guards find meaning, even though they were the ones like maiming and killing and torturing people. It's remarkable to see, because I don't think we know this anymore. I don't think modern society knows what you know. And I appreciate your perspective because I felt like I lost it. I lost it by not being I didn't invest the time and energy with the intention and attention with my own grandfather, that I missed it. And I missed the opportunity to hear his words of those times. And I see this passion and this purpose in you that I wish people, I just wish people understood. I wish people understood the degree. Because do you feel like humanity is expressing? I know we have what it takes, but do you believe that we have forms of actually showing what it takes to win this thing, not only now but in the long run? Do you think you have examples of that today that you're inspired
There are
by?
always, first of all, these tyrannies always end, they always end. They collapse. Because these are megalomaniacs.
Yes.
They are sociopaths. They're psychopaths. They are not normal human beings. They have absolutely no moral norms whatever, no respect for anything other than their own group, power, lust for power. Just think of also the kind of universe they're even doing for themselves. I mean, the pedophilia. Okay, there's child sacrifice. There's all sorts of things, dark things that are all coming out during this kind of time, and that was also during the Nazis. In other words, human beings need a moral structure, moral foundation. That's what the Ten Commandments are about. That's what the Nuremberg Code is about. That's what the Bill of Rights is about. You first of all have to protect the individual. And that's a big difference between America, United States, and the other so-called democratic countries. The others are built as democracy, majority rule, and that's it. No, that's not how the United States is. Respect equal rights for minorities as well as that's a big difference. So this whole movement about woke and all that, that's all nonsense too, because legally every citizen is equal under the law. Right now, the laws have been brushed aside and everything is executive order. That's dictatorship. That's fascism. And unless we break out of that, it will be the end. And there are no rescuers. There are no rescuers.
Vera, a question that I ask almost every interview, because I believe that if there's anybody who, knows what's at stake, it's you. But a question that I ask that I find really, really, really important, that I honestly can't wait to hear what you have to say, is say we do, right? Say your generation and all of the survivors like you, with the purpose of remembering and warning. And then on the other side of things, that we hear you and we listen, we take action, we stand up, we remember our own individual rights first. We remember that our own thoughts and beliefs and our own self-trust is first and primary. What do you see for humanity? What do you see for humanity if people heed the warning that you bring?
Well, the first thing we'd have to do is really sweep clean house. You can't have the same people certainly running things, and you've got to reassert and reformulate and absolutely forbid those kind of executive orders. The truth is, viruses are not this thing that they pretend that it is. There are lots of viruses. The fact that children are immune from many of the viruses tells you that our immune system is what we have to protect, not social distance and all this kind of nonsense. No, nature is far more complicated, and the immune system is extraordinarily complicated, works very well unless it is being interfered with the way this shot. This injection is attempting to control the immune system, to fool it, and so it turns against the body. That's why it's a weapon. Instead of protecting us, the immune system winds up attacking by overkill. There are a lot of, I think that so much of medicine, has been weaponized, and the Nazis were the first to show that, oh, you can do that. It's a very strong shield that people think, oh, well, that's the doctors are saying, so therefore, no. But when medicine becomes when doctors become agents, government agents, essentially, they're no longer doctors.
Right.
They're not to be trusted because they leave the Hippocratic Oath as they enter their government job. There's no Hippocratic Oath in government. And people need to understand that, so that when they declare an emergency, you have to say, what emergency? Why are you declaring an emergency? Yeah, maybe I'll decide what's an emergency for my family. It was all a fake. It was all, I think Bobby Kennedy called it a kabuki theater.
Wow.
And
go ahead, sorry.
It's very sad that people fell for it, hook, line, and sinker. And it's extremely telling that the highly educated are the most infected with no thinking. No thinking.
What would you say? I imagine there's a laundry list of things that you wish that humanity would take action on. But if there was one thing that our audience of listeners could take action on, what is one thing that you would ask them to do?
Well, we have a chance to have someone who actually would take responsibility and make his own decisions as president. Miracles can happen, right? He's certainly qualified.
So that was actually the question that I was going to ask you. So Bobby, I don't think he was planning to make his announcement so early, but his announcement is out. And tell me I'd love to know your thoughts on that. If you're talking about Bobby Kennedy, I'm pretty sure you are.
Yeah, I'm talking about Bobby. Yeah, I think that people have had it with all the corruption. Again, he has been sticking out his neck for what widely were unpopular views, right? But he is sincere, and he identifies with the people, even though he was brought up essentially also in a very wealthy family, But it took some generations, I mean, his grandfather certainly wasn't like him. Yeah. And and the fact is that he is on a mission. He's certainly aware, after all, his father and uncle and a nephew were assassinated. Assassination is actually a very not unusual in the United States. But one has to really think about, why is he sticking his neck? After all, he could have a much, easier life. He's fearless, and he, wants finally to prevent this catastrophic direction in which the government is going.
I've been thinking about that a lot lately, because I believe the announcement is probably going to come after the release of this episode, so we should be fine. The formal announcement, and as soon as it was leaked, or however it was, just watching the headlines, anti-vaxxer, all the same names, all the same strategies, and then you look at, let's just say, on the Republican side, because a grand majority of this movement for human freedom, and especially in the United States, is largely more conservative today.
Yep.
But we could argue that virtually any candidate that exists on the side, especially DeSantis, like without Bobby's work, without like all of the contribution that he's made, whether it's to the scientific conversation, to the legal conversation, to the human rights conversation, to the rights of children, like there is no candidate, there is no influencer today that could be separated from somehow Bobby's mission and Bobby's purpose. And it's remarkable to witness, and I appreciate you sharing that, because it's important to me, because I think in the landscape of everything that's going on, I've said for a lot of years, follow the money, right? You know more than most, because you lived through the Holocaust, the multinational corporations, and you have a whole documentary series that I can't wait to devour, because I want to know who these companies are, because I want to know who they are today.
Oh yeah, no.
Right, and who they were then. But when it comes around to it, it's remarkable to see that that this future and what's possible for humanity, at the end of the day, is going to come down to us. It's going to come down to human beings and individuals taking their own responsibility. And it reminds me of a quote from Jordan Peterson, where I think he said something like, all of the responsibility that you abdicate, that you give away, that you absolve, that you somehow, like, it will be,
someone else is collecting it.
It will be taken up by tyrants, right? And I couldn't thank you enough for sharing with us. I honestly wish we had several hours, but I probably should just watch your documentary, because I'm sure you're busy and you have a lot of things that you have to get done. But is there any last words that you'd love to share with our audience?
Keep the faith and trust that we are the many. We have to understand the only way they have power is if we obey. Obedience is their main strength. If they don't get our obedience, they're finished. And we can really chase them out, not with phony January 6th insurrection. Who ever heard of a coup d'etat without arms? Give me a break.
Man.
But that's it. And stop watching television. That would be the first thing I would say. Just don't watch the major or the social media.
I mean, it's remarkable because, it's just like you said. It's like you said, in the end, it's like if we honestly, no, I appreciate everything you shared. It's an amazing opportunity to interview you. I believe that your message and your generation and your experience is something that I have felt very called to just have on our show and to have front and center. We will share the links to your documentary. I'm going to recommend to virtually everybody to watch it, because I've said for a long time, I'm older than I look, but at the same time, I have found that this younger generation thinks I'm incredibly boring sometimes because of my quest for historical understanding of what's going on.
Yeah, it's not a quick fix.
and I think that's the thing, right? This mission is going to outlive us. It's going to outlive my kids' generation, and it's going to be, standing on the shoulders of giants like you, that we're able to see and cast a vision forward that is going to, like you said, don't lose hope, but continue to recognize that your own obedience is how they continue to enslave us. But I would add that your silence is complicity as well. I felt that from the very beginning, and I believe that today. And so thank you so much, Vera. And I can't wait to see how what you shared echoes through our community. I appreciate it.
Thank you very much for having me. Bye-bye.
We appreciate you joining us for this episode of the Future Generations podcast. Remember to rate, review, and subscribe on iTunes and Spotify. For more resources based on today's episode, as well as more ways to inspire a brighter future for you and your family, visit us at thefuturegen.com. That's all available exclusively on thefuturegen.com.